We've been working our way through the story of Joseph this month. And Joseph is a guy who experiences a roller coaster in life. He has some really amazing moments, and he has some really, really awful moments. And it just feels like throughout his life, he's doing this thing. He starts out, he's his father's favorite. He's given rulership over the whole family, but his brothers don't like him, and so they throw him in a pit, and then they sell him into slavery. But even in slavery, he rises up, and he becomes second in command in the house of Potiphar, the captain of the guard. But he's falsely accused by Potiphar's wife and thrown into prison. But in prison, again, he rises to the top, and he's given command over the whole prison. And he meets these guys who he thinks are going to get him out, and they forget about him. And that's kind of where we left Joseph last week. But what I want us to do this morning is I want us to chew on the question of how it is that Joseph was always able to rise to the top. Because Joseph is a guy that was always burdened. He was a slave to literally being a slave. He was sold into slavery. But he was also a slave to what other people did, what other people said. He was a slave to his circumstances. And even though in all of this Joseph was burdened, Joseph lived as if he was free. And that sounds kind of awesome to me. Because there are times when I feel burdened. There are times when I feel held back. Times when I feel like I can't be what I'm meant to be. And in those times, I want to be able to live like I'm free. How can I do that in the same way that Joseph did it? And here's the secret. Everyone can experience freedom by choosing forgiveness over bitterness. I mean, we would all understand if Joseph was a bitter person, right? If Joseph was bitter, we would say, I get it totally, Joseph. You should be bitter with your brothers. They were terrible to you. You should be bitter with Potiphar's wife. She said horrible things about you. You should be bitter at the guys who forgot you. That was a terrible thing for them to do. We get it if Joseph is bitter, but Joseph is never bitter. And I think the reason that Joseph is never bitter is because Joseph understood what it meant to forgive. Today we're going to cover Genesis 42 to 45. And we're going to kind of race right through it. So your assignment is this week to go home and read the whole chapter so you can see how it all unfolds. We don't have time to cover all of it today. But in Genesis chapter 42, we actually go back to the land of Canaan, where Joseph is from. And the reason is, as you'll remember from last week, there's a famine in the land. Now, Joseph predicted this. Remember, Joseph finally got out of prison, and he interpreted Pharaoh's dreams. He said there's going to be 7 years of plenty and 7 years of famine. Store up a lot during the plenty so you have more during the famine. And then we saw right at the end of the story that people from all over the world were coming to Egypt because there was food in Egypt. And that included Joseph's family. So there's a famine in Canaan. Joseph's father says to his brothers, go to Egypt where there's food. They go to Egypt, and they're shown to this guy, this Egyptian guy, and they say, okay, we need food. And so they go in, and he's obviously a royal person. He's second in command in Egypt. And so they bow before him. And what they don't know, but what we know, and what Joseph knows, is that they're actually Joseph's brothers. And they're bowing before Joseph. And that's significant in the story. Because remember, way back at the beginning, Joseph had these dreams. And one of the dreams was that all of his brothers would one day bow down to him. And through all of this, God's plan was never derailed. Even though Joseph was a slave, he was lied about, he was put in prison, he was forgotten. All of that happened. God's plan was never derailed, and now we see the fulfillment of that dream. Joseph recognizes his brothers, and he doesn't reveal who he is because he wants to test them. And so he accuses them of being spies, and they say, no, we're not spies, we just want food. He throws them in prison for a couple of days just to kind of see how they'll respond. Ultimately, the brothers begin to talk to each other about why is this happening? Why is this guy mistreating us like this? And they come to a conclusion. Chapter 42, verse 21 says, then they said to each other, obviously, we are being punished for what we did to our brother. Which reveals to us that these brothers have been carrying this guilt for a long time. They've been carrying this guilt for decades now of what they did to Joseph, and they're looking at their situation now saying, bad things are happening to us now because we did bad things then. Now we know that's not exactly true, right? We know that this is all God's plan working together. But in their minds, that's what's going on. Listen to what they said about Joseph. They said, we saw his deep distress when he pleaded with us, but we would not listen. And that is why this trouble has come upon us. So they're remembering back to those days, years and years ago, when they sold Joseph into slavery. And they remember hearing his cries. Now, just chew on this for a second. As Joseph was walked off into the desert, headed towards Egypt, where he would be sold into slavery, he's probably chained, and he's probably walking, and he's crying out loud enough for his brothers to hear him as he goes. And he keeps crying, and he keeps crying, and he keeps crying. And he's distressed. And the brothers heard it all the way. But I want us to focus not on the brothers for a minute. I want us to focus on Joseph. Because this is reminding us of what Joseph has been through. And it reminds us that as Joseph walked into the desert having been sold, he's crying out to his brothers, don't do this. Change your mind. Come and get me. Don't do this. But they did. They were calloused. They didn't care about the pain and the anguish and the distress that he was suffering. And so with that in mind, what should Joseph do to the brothers? What would you do? I know what I'd do. Right? I mean, I know what I want to do here. They don't know who I am. Joseph has all the power. The brothers are completely vulnerable. Joseph can have anybody put to death that he wants to. So what will Joseph do? Well, he's going to take care of them. He gives them food, but he wants to test them a little bit. And so when he gives them food, he puts their money back in their bags of grain and sends them on their way. And as they're returning, they discover the money in their bags of grain, and now they're terrified. Because this guy in Egypt, he didn't like us. He accused us of being spies, and now he's going to think that we stole the grain, so let's get home as quick as we can. And what they don't know, but what we know, is that this is a test. Will they demonstrate that they've changed at all? Will they show any kind of integrity, any kind of character? So they go home and they tell their dad everything that's happened. And they say, Dad, we got a problem. Because this man in Egypt who didn't like us, he sent us back to you, but he told us that we had to bring our younger brother back. You see, when they were talking to Joseph, one of the things they said to him is, we're not spies, we're just from this land of Canaan. Look, we have a dad, and we've got one other brother who's not here anymore. And Joseph knew that was his brother Benjamin. And remember, Benjamin is Joseph's full brother. Like all these brothers, there's 4 moms. It's a messed up family, right? And so all of these brothers are actually Joseph's half-brothers. But he actually has one brother that is his full brother. Joseph and Benjamin were the sons of Rachel, Jacob's favorite wife. And so Joseph loves his younger brother. His younger brother wasn't like the other brothers. And so Joseph said to them, I'm going to let you go back, but you bring me your younger brother so you can prove that you're not spies. And just to make sure you're honest, I'm going to keep one of you here. And so he chose Reuben to keep. And so the brothers go back to their dad, and they say, look, he kept Reuben, and we got to take Benjamin. And here Jacob reveals again a little bit why this is such a dysfunctional family. Because as a father, I would expect him to say, oh no, Reuben, my son Reuben's in prison. We've got to do whatever we can to get him out. And what he says is, who? Reuben? I don't care. You're not taking Benjamin. He says, Benjamin is my favorite, right? Joseph was his favorite. Now Benjamin is his favorite. You're not taking Benjamin. I don't care if Reuben rots in jail. You're not taking Benjamin. And that lasted until the food ran out. And when the food ran out, they said, we got to go back. And so Jacob sends the sons back, and he says, take twice as much money, apologize for what happened before, and they go back. And they get back to Egypt, and they meet Joseph again, and they do all the buying and selling of the grain. They say to the treasurer, hey, look, we found this money in our bags before. We want to repay it. Pause for a moment. They're passing the test. They're showing that something's different about them. The treasurer says, well, actually, no, we got paid, so that's your money. It must have been God that did that for you. We know it was Joseph. Joseph says to his servants, I want you to make a big dinner for these guys and feed them. And Joseph sits down at dinner with them, and he sees Benjamin, and he can't contain himself because this is his brother that he loves. And he begins to cry, so he runs out of the room. And the brothers are very confused as to what's going on. Why is this guy running out of the room? And then they notice that Benjamin has 5 times as much food as the rest of them, which should have been a little bit of a hint, but it's not. They can't figure this out. And eventually Joseph comes back to them and says, I'm going to send you back with food. You see, Joseph has one more test. He sends them back with food. And as the brothers leave, they're taking the food with them. And as they get out of Egypt, they see behind them, here comes some soldiers. These are Joseph's soldiers chasing them down. And they're chased down, and the soldiers say, hey guys, look, someone in your group has stolen something from our master. And the brothers say, no, we wouldn't, we promise. We're honest men. Ironic. We wouldn't steal anything. Go ahead, look through our bags. And they look through the bags, and they find Joseph's silver cup in Benjamin's bag. Now, this is a problem. Because what their father said to them when he sent them off was, if anything happens to Benjamin, I will die. And now the brothers realize that Benjamin's being framed, and we don't understand why. Best case scenario, he's going to spend his life in prison. Worst case scenario, he's going to be killed. And so the soldiers take Benjamin back, but the brothers all go with. And when they get back, Judah steps up. Now, Judah, to this point in the story, has not been a good guy. In fact, the story that we skipped, Genesis 38, Judah's a really bad guy. But now we see a sign that maybe Judah is changing. Because he steps forward and says, look, if you do anything to my brother, it will kill my father. So take me instead. And that's enough. That's enough for Joseph. And so in this moment, Joseph decides to reveal himself. He says, look, I am your brother. I'm Joseph. And you can imagine the emotions that are going through everybody's mind and heart right now, right? Like Joseph is like, finally I get to reveal myself. The brothers are like, okay, we're dead now. And that they're going through this, but Joseph talks kindly to them. He says, look, I want you guys to go back and get Dad, get the whole family, bring everybody back here. I'm going to take care of you. I'm going to feed you. I'm going to put you in the nicest place. You're going to have everything you could need. You'll be safe here. Joseph says, I'm going to take care of you. Now, I have a question for you this morning. Because at some point in this story, Joseph forgave his brothers. But when did that happen? When do you think Joseph forgave his brothers? I want to suggest to you that I think probably he forgave his brothers long before he ever saw them. One of the reasons I think that is because if he hadn't, he probably would have killed them. As second in command in Egypt, Joseph could have had anybody killed that he wanted to. If he had not forgiven his brothers when he first saw them, he probably would have just said, hey, take these guys out back off with their heads. I'm done with them. But he doesn't. Right away, he begins to take care of them. He begins to provide for them. So I think that Joseph probably, long before he ever saw the brothers, had forgiven them. And the second reason I think that is because I think that's the secret of Joseph's success. I think the reason that Joseph was able to elevate himself in Potiphar's house is because Joseph chose forgiveness over bitterness. I think the reason that Joseph was able to elevate himself in the prison was because Joseph chose forgiveness over bitterness. I think the reason Joseph rose to power in Pharaoh's house was because Joseph chose forgiveness over bitterness. You see, the thread that we see through all of Joseph's life is that Joseph rises up because he builds into other people. He takes care of other people. He makes the people around him better, and we see this over and over again. And I want you to understand something this morning, that bitter people don't make other people better. Bitter people only make themselves more bitter. I think that somewhere, as Joseph was walking to Egypt, not knowing what was going on, but being confident that God was in control, came to the understanding that he had to let go of the bitterness. He had to choose forgiveness. And because he was able to choose that forgiveness, he discovered the freedom that allowed him to experience everything that God had planned for him. I want to take the rest of our time this morning to walk through 5 principles of forgiveness that we can discover in Joseph's life. 5 principles of forgiveness. Here's the first one. Forgiveness is a choice to stop replaying the pain of the past. You know, when somebody hurts us, we love to run an instant replay on that. If you're watching March Madness right now, you know what an instant replay is. You probably know what it is, even if you're not. We love in sports, a really good play happens, and the announcers will run a replay of it. They'll show you the play again, and a lot of times they'll slow it down and point out lots of different parts of the play. They'll analyze it. They'll show you what this guy's doing over here, and look at what this guy's doing here, and this guy's doing this, and this is why he's doing that. We love to do this with our hurts. When someone hurts us, we love to replay it in our mind, and a lot of times we'll slow it down and begin to analyze it, right? That guy didn't come to my birthday party because he doesn't like me. And he didn't like me because he's a jerk. And when I asked him why he didn't come to my birthday party, he said it was because he had to be with his family. But I know that's not true because he's a liar. Do you see what I'm doing? I'm taking this hurt, and I'm breaking it down, and I'm analyzing it. I'm like John Madden with the telestrator. I'm circling it here and drawing arrows. This guy hates me. He's a jerk. He's a liar. I went back on Facebook, and I looked and saw what he was doing that day, and he was at a ball game, and I'm just over and over replaying and replaying and replaying. And do you know what happens when we replay our hurt? We grow bitter. Because every time we replay that hurt, it gives us a reason to be angry. And it gives us a reason to hate that person and be outraged with that person. And anger and hatred and outrage lead to bitterness. And before you know it, we're more and more bitter, and so bitter that we can't see past it. And so forgiveness is a choice to not replay our hurts. It means that in that moment when that hurt first comes to my mind, and listen, we can't always control that. Sometimes our minds are triggered by things around us, by something we hear, something we see, somebody we see. And in that moment, immediately that hurt comes running back into our minds. But in that moment, we have a choice. We can either hit play, and then rewind and play, and then rewind and play. And this is what we love to do. Or we can say, I'm going to hit stop. I'm not going to replay this. Because the more we think about our hurts, the more we talk about our hurts, the more we replay our hurts, the more bitter we become. Now understand this. It can be helpful. It can be helpful to intentionally talk to someone for the purpose of healing. That can be helpful. But it is not helpful to always talk about everything to everyone. Because this is what we like to do. Somebody hurts us. It's like, I'm going to go around and tell everybody what they did. I can't believe they did this. We tell everybody every detail all the time, and we can't stop talking about it. And then when somebody says, are you sure you should be talking about it? We're like, hey, I'm just processing this. I'm dealing with my hurt. No, you're not. You're growing bitter. But it can be helpful to find one person that knows what they're doing, that can walk through it with you and help you find healing. The more you replay your hurt, the more bitter you will become. See, ultimately, forgiveness is not about what happened to you. It's about what you do with it. And you have a choice about how you deal with it. That takes us to our second principle, which is that forgiveness is a process, not a phrase or an event. You see, sometimes we have this idea that what forgiveness is, I just say, I forgive you to someone, and then I'm done, right? So I forgive you, okay, I'm done. That's not how it works, because the reality is, and Joseph discovered this, that when you forgive someone, you're probably going to have to forgive them again. You see, I think Joseph forgave the brothers before they ever showed up, and I think Joseph forgave the brothers every time they showed up. Because forgiveness is a process. Over and over again, I have to choose not to replay that hurt in my mind. Some of you remember when I first came to the gathering, for the first few years we were here, I would drive back and forth from here to Michigan every week. Our kids were finishing high school. We wanted to let them finish high school where they had started, and so we were letting them stay there, and so Mary Ann stayed with the kids, and I came down here, and I'd preach here on Sunday, and I'd stick around for Monday, and sometimes I'd be here Tuesday. Every so often I'd be here Wednesday. Then I'd get in the car, drive 6 hours north back to Michigan. So I could be with my family for a couple days, and then Saturday afternoon, get back in the car, come back down here, and I'd be here for the weekend, and we just replay the whole thing. And every time I would drive from here back to there, I would have to drive on I-96 from Grand Rapids, Michigan to Muskegon, Michigan. That's where I lived. And along that drive, about 15 minutes before I got to Muskegon, there's a little town called Fruitport. And when I drive past Fruitport, there is this massive building there. You can't miss it. Sits on 60 acres of property, over 100,000 square feet, big, huge billboard-sized sign, and that was my former church. That was the church that I had to leave for my conscience sake. That was the church that all the hurt happened in. And every time I'd go back to see my family, I'd have to drive by it, and you can't miss it because it's so big. And every time I drove by it, I had a choice to make, because you know when you drive by something like that, it brings back all the memories. And I had to choose, am I going to replay everything that happened there? Am I going to replay the angry emails, the conversations I had, the ugly church meetings, the anonymous letters, the gossip, the lies, the things that were said and done to my kids, to my wife, to me? Am I going to replay all of that as I drive in? And here's the problem. When I chose to replay it, and early on that was just about every time, for the last 15 minutes of my drive, I would run through all of it, and I would analyze it, and I would think about all those people. And that person's a jerk because they did this, and that was their intention, and that was their motivation. And I would grow angrier and more bitter. And I'd get home to see my family that I hadn't seen for several days, and I'd walk in the door an angry and bitter person. That's not what I wanted. And over time, what I realized was, I can't do this. I actually sometimes would try driving in a different way. It would take a half an hour longer because I'd have to come in a different highway. But that didn't work either, because I'd realize I'm a half an hour later than I want to be, because I'm avoiding that place I don't want to go past. And I don't want to go past it because I don't want to think about it. Now here I go again. And I realized I got to come to this place where I let go of this bitterness. Where when I drive past that building, I'm able to say, you know what? That was pretty awful. But I forgive them. I'm not going to let them control me. I discovered that when I could do that, I could drive those last 15 minutes in peace and joy, and I could walk in the house to see my family and be the dad I wanted to be and the husband I wanted to be. Because forgiveness is a process, and I had to let go over and over and over again. Now let me pause here just for a second, because don't want you to miss this. Forgiveness does not always equal closeness. All right? Sometimes I can forgive someone. That doesn't mean I'm going to be close to them. Forgiveness cannot be earned, right? I have to give forgiveness. Forgiveness cannot be earned. But sometimes proximity needs to be earned. And I'm going to be honest with you. I don't ever have to go back to that church. Right? I don't ever have to go back and be around some of those people. And in fact, I would probably choose often to go out of my way not to do that, because I don't trust them. I don't know that they have my best interest at heart. And I have a feeling that probably if I was back in that scenario, in that setting, it would be really bad for me. Forgiveness does not always lead to closeness. Sometimes forgiveness means distance. That's why Joseph's testing his brothers here. What Joseph is trying to determine is, I forgive them, I'm not going to kill them, I'm going to take care of them, but I don't know if I can bring them here. I need to find out if they're changed. So it's possible to forgive someone, to let go of the hurt, to let go of the anger, to let go of the hatred, but still say, but you know what? It's not healthy for me to be back where I was. So I'm going to stay here where I am. And that's okay. Because one of the things we need to understand about forgiveness, and this is the third principle, is that forgiveness benefits us as much as it benefits those we forgive. In fact, I would say it probably benefits us more than those we forgive. You see, the reason you forgive someone is not for them, it's for you. I've heard it said that to hold a grudge against someone is like drinking poison and hoping they die. It doesn't work very well. But this is what we do oftentimes when someone hurts us, is we stay angry with them. And we stay bitter at them. And you know what? They don't care. They don't even know. It's not hurting them one bit, but it's rotting out your heart. And so being able to make that choice to not replay the hurt, being able to make that choice to not seek revenge, that benefits me more than it benefits them. Let me be honest with you this morning. There are some of you here this morning, you need to forgive people that you will never see again. Maybe they live somewhere else, maybe they're far away, maybe for whatever other reason you'll never see them again, maybe they're dead. There are people in your life that you will never see again, but you need to forgive them because your bitterness against them is destroying your soul. And even though you never see them again, being able to let go of that pain, being able to turn it over to God, will bring you a freedom you never knew you could experience. And that brings us right to the fourth principle. And I think this principle is actually kind of Joseph's secret sauce. Forgiveness trusts that God is in control. You see, we get angry at people because they don't do what we want them to do. They don't say what we want them to say. And that anger leads to hatred, and that hatred leads to bitterness. And then we just sit in that stew of bitterness. And listen, if you let your life sit in a stew of bitterness, your life is going to taste bitter. What we need to all understand is that we can't control other people. You can't control what other people say to you. You can't control what they say about you. You can't control what they do to you. You can't control what they do behind your back. You can't control any of that, so don't let that make you bitter. But what you can do is rely on the one who's in control. Listen to what Joseph says to his brothers. This is chapter 45. He says, I am Joseph, your brother, the one you sold into Egypt. Now pause for a second there, because I like that Joseph does this. He doesn't gloss over the truth. What the brothers did was wrong, and Joseph's not saying it was okay. He said, you guys did something really awful. You sold me into slavery. But now, don't be worried or angry with yourselves for selling me here, because God sent me ahead of you to preserve life. We're going to dig into this more next week. But what Joseph is saying was, look, guys, God was in control of this all along. And now here, decades later, Joseph understands it. But this was the principle that guided Joseph through all of the dark years. As a slave, he believed that God was in control. In prison, he believed that God was in control. When he was forgotten, he believed that God was in control. And while he couldn't see the whole plan, he knew God had a plan, and he knows God's plan is not derailed. So for me to forgive someone requires me to have that attitude. I don't know why they did that. I don't know what's motivating them. I don't know what their intentions were. And I can't control if they do it again or if they don't do it again, but I do know that God is in control. And their bad actions can't derail his good plan. So I can forgive them, and I can let go of this hurt, and I can let go of my need for revenge because I know that God has this. I think this is one of the reasons in the New Testament that God tells us that vengeance is his. You ever wondered about this? Why does God say that? Why does God say vengeance is mine? I think one of the reasons God says that is because he's trying to take that burden away from us. You know, when somebody hurts me, I want to hurt them back. I want to get revenge. I want to make them feel the way I feel. And God says, David, that's not a burden that you should carry, because that burden's only going to make you bitter. So why don't you let me take that? You know what? I'll do the right thing in the right time. You don't worry about that, David. You just let go of it and let me handle it. There is incredible freedom when you understand that I cannot control the people around me. And there's much in my life that I cannot control. But I'm following a God who's in full control. And he's never surprised, and he's never caught off guard, and he's never worried, and he's never concerned. He's got this. And because he's got it, I can trust him. And I can let go of this over here. Forgiveness trusts that God is in control. And here's the last principle. Forgiveness is a response to God's grace. In Matthew 18, Jesus tells a story, we call it the story of the unforgiving servant. There's a man who has built up an incredible amount of debt, so much that he could never pay it off in his lifetime. And the person to whom he owes the debt forgives him. Says, you know what, you don't have to pay it back. It's forgiven, it's gone, the books are wiped clean. You never have to pay me another cent. And the forgiven servant goes out and immediately sees a guy that owes him $5. Says, hey, you owe me $5. Pay up now or I'm having you thrown in prison. And Jesus says, this guy doesn't understand forgiveness. Because those who have been forgiven much, forgive much. You have been forgiven much. Do you understand that your mistakes, your shortcomings, your errors, your sin, all of that has harmed God's creation? When you hurt other people, those are people made in the image of God. You're destroying God's good creation. But God forgives you. Luke chapter 23, as Jesus is being crucified, he says, Father, forgive them, because they do not know what they are doing. When Jesus spoke these words, he was certainly speaking of the people who were crucifying him. And he was certainly speaking about me. In human history, no one has deserved better and received worse than Jesus. He's the only one who's ever lived who never sinned. And he was killed unjustly for my sins. You see, he took upon himself all of my shortcomings, all of my mistakes, all of my sin. And as he laid on that cross, having nails put through his hand, that was for me. That was to pay the price of my sins. That was for you. That was to pay the price of your sins. And as he hung there, he said, Father, forgive them. Father, forgive me. Forgive you. And because you have been forgiven so much, you now can be a person who forgives. You know, I know that there are some of you here this morning who struggle to forgive. I do. I know that there are some of you this morning, you feel like your life is being held back by bitterness, by anger, by hatred, by hurt. Your inability to forgive others is holding you back. And can I suggest that maybe you struggle to forgive others because you've not yet received God's forgiveness? You've not yet opened yourself to the possibility that there is a God who loves you so much that he sees past all of your shortcomings and he forgives you and he wants you to be his child. And if you have never received the forgiveness of God, today is that day. You don't have to go through any kind of ceremonies. There's no special works that you have to do. You don't have to wait till the last song and come down as the choir sings Just As I Am. We don't have a choir and we don't sing Just As I Am. Right now, right where you are, in your mind, you can talk to God. And you can simply say to him, Father, I receive your forgiveness. Make me new. And he will. And as you begin to experience that forgiveness of God, you will be able to forgive the people in your past who have hurt you, who have harmed you, who have held you back. And you'll discover the freedom you were created to live. This is for all of us, right? This is for all of us because all of us need to forgive. And so this morning, we all must answer this question. How will I respond to God's grace? How will I respond to God's mercy? How will I respond to God's forgiveness? And for some of you, your response needs to be to stop. To stop replaying the hurt. Next time that video starts to play in your mind, choose to hit stop. For some of you, your response to God's grace and forgiveness needs to be to trust. To trust that he is in control. To trust that you can rely on Him to do what is best for you, that His plan is never derailed and His timing is always perfect. And when you trust that, you can forgive others. And so maybe for you this morning, your response to God's grace is to trust. And maybe for some of you, your response to God's grace and forgiveness is to offer someone else forgiveness. Maybe there is a conversation you need to have. Or maybe it's something you just need to do internally where you say, I'm going to let go of this now. I'm going to hand this over to God now. I'm going to trust that He can bring good out of this. And I'm going to give it over to Him. None of us can change the past. It's happened. And none of us can control other people. We cannot control what they say. We cannot control what they do. And there will be people who hurt you. But what all of us can control is how we respond. We can choose to respond with forgiveness because we serve a God who has forgiven us. And if you choose that path, what you will discover, just as Joseph discovered, is that the path of forgiveness is the path to freedom.